This month marks the 1-year anniversary of Amanda being in Guadalajara and being an entrepreneur expat here in Mexico. So we're going to talk a little bit today about that and hear from Amanda about what her experience has been like this past year living here.
Welcome to Entrepreneur Expat. I'm Amanda. This is Justin. We are both digital entrepreneurs with over 15 years of experience, each of us, in sales, digital marketing, software, all the online businessy things. And in addition to that, we are expats living in Mexico. I'm celebrating my 1-year anniversary as an expat, as he said. So if that's something that you're interested in, make sure to subscribe to this channel, hit the notification bell. And if you're interested in moving to Mexico specifically, or just getting started on your own expat journey or living overseas, make sure to download our Moving to Mexico guide, which you will find below.
So now that you've been here for an entire year, give us a little bit about the experience so far, what it's been like, what it was like coming here, and how you've evolved over the last 12 months in Mexico.
Well, I don't think you can start living overseas or living in other countries without you completely changing as a person. The first 6 months were a little bit more in and out, hopping back and forth between here and the US. And then, we had a conference on a cruise ship where we went to the ABC Island, so there was a lot more hopping around. And one of the things that I noticed in the first 6 months where there was more full-time travel, hopping around, is I noticed I don't like that necessarily. I love to travel, I just don't love the constant hopping around. It's very disruptive to do that. I know
You like more of the slow travel.
I like more of the slow travel, yes. I've learned that because now we've been in the Guadalajara area without necessarily getting on a plane for 6 months since we got back from the last trip. Straight 6. So I've learned that I like the slow travel a lot more because I get to make friends, which if you're hopping around, that's more difficult to do for a lot of people. I make friends anywhere, but I know that that's something that a lot of people struggle with, or it's difficult to work if you're hopping around constantly. Though all that hopping around did help us figure out business models where it is more scalable. We don't have to be sustainable, which is what we help a lot of our clients with now. So it wasn't all bad. It did help us figure out a lot of stuff that we help our clients with now. But yeah, I learned that I'm definitely more of a slow travel kind of person.
And what was the biggest challenge coming here? What was the biggest challenge for you actually moving overseas and coming to Mexico?
Change is hard, I think, right? And I'm in my 30s, so I did this in my mid-30s, not a young whippersnapper just out of college. And I think as you get older, sometimes people think it gets more difficult because you are more accustomed to a certain way of living, or maybe you've established yourself in other ways that maybe it's just a little bit more difficult to, I don't want to say disentangle, that doesn't feel like the right word. But
well, I guess it's when you've got a really fixed way of doing things in your life, and you're really settled, and you've got your peer groups, and you've got your social activities and everything else established. Sometimes it's hard to just uproot that and start a completely different life somewhere else.
Yeah, so that was a little bit challenging, but at the same time, I was very ready for a different kind of life. I'd been researching this for a long time. The business that I had built, or at least as I knew it, wasn't functioning that way anymore. I'd made a lot of changes. So it really was like a starting fresh, starting over kind of energy, which in the beginning was a little bit challenging because, again, you're just used to a certain way of doing things. But now, a year in, I'm like, best decision ever.
What were some of the things that were really unexpected for you, or things that you would have never thought, oh, this is what being in Mexico or being outside of the U.S. in general is going to be like? What were the things that maybe surprised you the most?
That's actually a really good question, because I'd been to Mexico before. I already knew that Mexico is an absolutely magical country that will steal your heart. So I already knew that because I'd been here before. And I knew that Mexico wasn't like I think somebody put in the comments, they're like, finally, people are realizing that Mexico isn't like a Mad Max post-apocalyptic world with no laws.
Yeah.
So I already knew that. About Mexico, I wasn't even shocked by the lack of inefficiency in some things, like opening a bank account. Like, I expected that because I am Latina and I know things move a little bit slower here sometimes. I think for me, honestly, the most shocking part was the fact that it took me a little bit longer to pick up the slang or the accent.
Yeah, depending on where you
Yeah.
go, like between even Mexico and Colombia and Costa Rica and Panama, there's totally different words for things, different accents.
Yeah.
You know, so one place you might call something a straw, and then another place, if you say that same thing, people will look at you weird because
Right.
it means something else, right?
Right.
Or papaya.
Like, I've
That
been speaking
doesn't.
I've been speaking
Yeah.
Spanish my whole life. My parents are Cuban, but like we say pitillo for straw, but you don't say pitillo in Mexico. That means something
Yes.
totally different. So I think in that case it was just more like funny things like that, like things getting not lost in translation because it was the same language, but like lost in slang, lost in the lingo.
Yeah.
I think for me that was actually a little bit surprising. I thought that was going to be easier, and that actually turned out to be quite an adjustment. Yeah.
And what about positive things that surprised you? Like, where you're like, wow, I can't believe that, the things are like this right now.
I mean, when I initially got here, I booked. I was supposed to be back in the U.S. in 6 weeks because we didn't even know where we were going to live, and we were trying to figure that out. And then after spending time here, I was like, wait a minute, lower cost of living, higher quality of life, so much to see in Mexico. I mean, we've decided we're probably going to be here for a few years just because there is so much to see in Mexico, that it'll take you a while. To see it all and experience it all. Each state, each region is just so different. It's not like the United States. I've traveled throughout most of the US in my 20s, and unless you're like in New York or Miami, where it's a lot of different cultures in one place and there's always something to do, after 5 days, it's all basically just the same thing. It's pretty homogenous.
It is.
In Mexico, it's not like that at all. Everything is so different. Each region has its own flavor, its own style. And it's not homogenous. There's just always something new to discover in Mexico. And it's just completely magical. It's like one of those Russian dolls that there's like a new doll, a new thing to discover, a new thing to discover in Mexico. That's been extremely positive. I don't know, after like 6 weeks of being in Mexico, I was like, yeah, this is a no-brainer. I'm just staying. I'm not going back to the US. It just makes no logical sense at all.
Would anything make you want to go back to the U.S. or back to the West?
Not right now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What would have to happen for you to be like, oh, I would want to go back to America?
I mean, I don't even know if it necessarily can happen. The U.S., we had our first presidential debate in the U.S. a few weeks ago.
Oh, goodness.
And I was like, either way you go, you're screwed. I mean, it's just not a good time right now. I don't know. I really don't know, because if I compare it, I'm like, I get good quality health care at a good price in Mexico. I get higher quality food in Mexico. I get higher quality of life in Mexico. People are warm, they're kind, they're friendly. I get a lot of culture.
Even the police here are nice.
Even the police are nice.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know what would have to happen, because it's just not looking good. And when you compare emerging countries like Mexico to what's going on in the West right now, it's like the West is like steadily declining, and then the emerging countries are going up. So it just doesn't make sense to go back there right now.
What was the top thing that you've learned about yourself over these last 12 months?
That I can adapt very easily. I'm an adaptable person. It doesn't mean it doesn't come without its challenges, because there's always challenges when you're moving around other countries, when you're moving to another country. It comes with challenges, and it just is what it is, right? It's a little chaotic, which is why we say, get as much help if you can, if you're going to do it. And also, if you have a business, streamline the hell out of it, because you can plan for the best and things could go relatively well, and there's still going to be some level of chaos, some snag, something that goes wrong, because that's just the nature of moving around a lot.
Yep.
Or moving to another country where you're learning a new system, a new way of doing things. It comes with its challenges. But that I'm a very adaptable person, and that I'm a very adaptable human, and that there's a superpower in that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I would say that's one of the biggest things.
Well,
I've
there you
learned
have
about
it. A
myself.
year in summary. Anything else you want to add for our viewers?
Yeah, I'd say if you're considering doing it, just freaking do it. Like a lot of people in the comments have been saying, man, this has just been something I've been wanting to do for 10 years, or this is like my 15-year plan. It doesn't have to be. I mean, for me, this happened very fast, very quick.
Just came here with a suitcase.
I came here with a suitcase and a half.
Yeah.
Yeah.
half of a suitcase with my Amazon boxes.
Yeah, half of a suitcase with his Amazon purchases, and then just a suitcase of my own stuff. And in 6 weeks, I was like, nope, I'm staying. It doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to go back. So I will, uproot my life and figure it out and readjust the business to this new way of living. Actually, one thing that we brought up a few weeks ago that you and I were talking about that is probably worth mentioning. You noticed that I was like really emotional for like a good 6 months there. And we realized that I was going through like an emotional, mental, nervous system like detox.
Yeah. I think in the US things are so just hyped up and fast, and there's so little
There's little social time, there's little quality of life, there's always an
Yeah.
anxiety or a panic over something. Even if you make a lot of money and you're doing well, to just maintain it, there's a pressure to either maintain it or keep growing or keep growing
just
faster,
to keep
stronger,
it, because
or just
people
keep
are
it.
constantly trying to either sue you or take your
Yeah.
money or scam you out of something or whatever it is. Like, it's the US, it never stops. You can never just really
Yeah, a lot of people in the
rest.
comments have said the culture in the US is just kind of like devolved as a culture.
Yeah.
So I think that's important to bring up, that happened in this first year. Like there was a lot of emotion. It's like I was going through a detox of having been so stressed for so long. Just because culture in the US is stressful. Imagine like now I don't go into a panic attack every time we have to go to a doctor or somebody gets sick or we have to go to the farm. There's no panic attack anymore. Whereas in the United States, it's like sheer panic, sheer fear, sheer, oh my gosh, because the healthcare system sucks and it's expensive. So I think that's important to note. I think people are simultaneously going to feel relieved, but there's going to be a bit of like a detox process probably that happens as your mind and your body adjust to a much calmer, less anxious way of life.
Well, and of course you just have to adjust in general.
Yeah,
and,
you have to
and
adjust
there's a
in
lot
general.
of changes, right?
Yeah.
Things aren't quite as efficient. It's definitely a slower pace. It's definitely more on the, I guess, what's the opposite of individualistic, right? It's more
It's
more of
collective.
a more of
It's
a
more of a
collective society
collectivist
versus
society. Yeah.
versus individualistic.
Yeah,
for
and a
sure.
lot of expats have brought that up on YouTube, that in Mexico it's definitely more of a community-based society, not just
More
in
based in
Mexico.
family.
More based in family, more based in the community. And it's not just in Mexico, that's how a lot of emerging countries are.
Yeah.
Because, they don't trust their governments and they didn't have the systems in place. So as a culture, they learned to be more skeptical and handle things themselves or as a community, but also more collectivist, where it's more about the community, not necessarily only the individual. And in the United States, there's that rugged individualism, pick yourself up by your bootstraps, which has its good side. A lot of innovation comes out of the US. No one can deny that. But it also has a downside, which is, an epidemic of loneliness and mental health issues. So
Bueno.
there's that side of it. So yeah, I think that's been pleasant though. Like that everybody here is very community oriented.
Yeah.
That's been a really pleasant
It's a breath
change.
of fresh air.
It's
for
a
sure.
breath of fresh air. And most emerging countries are like that. It's not just Mexico. I think one of the things I've also realized since being in Mexico specifically is that I'm far more interested in visiting emerging countries or more off the beaten path countries than like the typical, hey, let's just go to France. Like let's just go to Western Europe. I still want to see a lot of things in Western Europe, don't get me wrong. It's just that more kind of countries that are on the upswing or very different culturally from the United States are far more interesting to me right now to go visit and see and live in.
They're on the list for sure.
They're on the list for sure. We'll do another video on countries we're interested in living in once we're done living in Mexico. So In order to not miss that video, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you know when we publish that particular video that you guys have asked us for. And if you want to be notified via email every time we drop a new video every single week, make sure to sign up for our Living in Mexico guide, because you will also be signed up for our email list and you will be the first to know when there is a new video published. Plus, you'll also get insights that we only share with the expat community. Some of you have asked about meetups and things like that in the Guadalajara area. Those on the email list will be the first to know when we're ready to do those. So make sure to sign up for that below, and we'll catch you guys on the next one.